Is an illustration of homegrown terrorism arrests since November 2008, and I think that this picture really says it all and why this hearing is so important. And again, Madam Chair, thank you for holding this. This is a threat. And you know, I was a federal prosecutor, and a thought itself is not a violation of the law. So, Mr. McCloud-Ball, I agree with you that a belief or an ideology is not a prosecutable offense. Always a conspiracy requires an overt act. An overt act is the first step towards completing a conspiracy, which does make it a violation of the law. However, it always starts with an ideology. It always begins with a radical idea or belief that eventually does come to fruition, not in every case, thank God, but in the cases that we've seen. We've been able to stop a lot of these cases, fortunately, but some have not. I think the Hassan case, Dr. Zogby, is a very good illustration of a case that failed, was a whole failure of law enforcement, as you said. I think that was absolutely correct. When we had a major in the Army, United States Army, at the largest military installation in the United States, just north of my district, having communications with one of the top al-Qaeda recruiters in Yemen, having communications with Pakistan. This information apparently was in the hands of the Joint Terrorism Task Force in Washington, one of the members from the Department of Defense, and yet that information was not shared with the very base where the major resided. And don't you think General Cohn, who I talked to at the memorial service when we buried 13 soldiers there, and I talked to the wounded who said, yes, he screamed Allah Akbar as he shot us. Don't you think that General Cohn may have liked to have had that information? That he had a major at his base that was communicating with a top al-Qaeda recruiter in Yemen? And yet that didn't happen. That information was not shared with the military, with Fort Hood. I know that may be a little bit, I think it is on point because this man radicalized, and what we don't know is whether he radicalized all on his own or whether he had a little bit of help from the outside. What can we do? And I have so many questions I could bring up today, but that case is a classic case of failure. What can we do better to ensure that there are no more Hassans out there, as General Cohn told me? How many more are out there that are a threat to our United States military? Because we know al-Qaeda targets the United States military. It's out of their playbook. They targeted Fort Dix. They bring back their playbook time and time again, like they did with the World Trade Center and like they'll probably try to do with the Capitol. How can we stop another Hassan case from happening again? And I'll direct that to anybody on the panel. Dr. Cragen, I don't know if you seem to, anybody who would like to tackle that.
Sure. I mean, I can start, and then please feel free. I would say, first of all, I'd like to get away from the term self-radicalization. There are some examples of that, but overwhelmingly, there is normally a mentor, I think the term was used, involved in the radicalization process. And so, like I said during my testimony, I mean, one thing is to actually start focusing some attention on these mentors. That attention doesn't necessarily have to be in law enforcement attention, but I think that is one way to do it. But I also think, unfortunately, you know, Timothy McVeigh, I'm from Oklahoma, so Timothy McVeigh also got through. Right, so I think that we're not going to be able to stop all of the lone wolves, and that's sort of an unfortunate reality that we're facing today.
Anybody else on the panel?
Yes, I think that prevention is the right word, and the question is how you think about prevention. And I think it's important to think about prevention not strictly from a law enforcement point of view, but say from a community policing point of view and from a public health point of view, where we try to establish relationships, change people's thinking and change people's behavior in such a way to catch them upstream before they go too far down the line. Mm-hmm. I believe we're not doing that right now. I think counterterrorism, as I see it in the microcosm of, say, the Somali community in Minneapolis, is limited to FBI criminal investigation. And with all due respect to those people who do that important work, I think that there are still shortcomings in the area of community policing and preventive approach. There are good people in those communities, parents and community leaders, who want to support these efforts, but they're not involved and engaged. And that's what prevention means. That's what I think we have to be doing more of.
Dr. Wine, let me just say I completely agree with you. I worked as a federal prosecutor, worked with Joint Terrorism Task Forces. I think one thing that we need to do a better job is reaching out to the Muslim community and getting involved in the community where we can identify the 1% or less than 1% of potential threats.
Mr. McCaul, let Dr. Zogby respond to your question briefly, but to all members, let's try to stick strictly to the 5 minutes to be fair to everybody.
It does not begin with ideology. Ideology is the paint on the surface that is already there. And I think he said Allahu Akbar. He did not mean Allahu Akbar. What he meant was, I'm going to kill you. I hate you. I am angry, really angry. It's sort of like, when I used to teach religion, I used to say, the meaning of a word is how it's used. If somebody says, oh, Jesus Christ, that doesn't mean that they're a devout believer. It usually means they're angry. Or, oh, Jesus Christ, I'm excited. We cannot allow the abuse of language to mask purpose, to take our attention off what is going on. And that is why I agree with Mr. McLeod-Ball. You judge the action, not the language. In another era, as Peter Bergen said on CNN the other night, Major Hassan may have turned to Maoism or may have turned to some other ideology. The language of the moment to describe anger, to describe the conflict we're having and the deep alienation that I'm feeling is this language of religion. Do not let them confuse us with what is really going on here, because that's when we start using the sledgehammer. And as I'm watching the media, CNN covering this problem of what happened in Pakistan, showing Muslims on the mall on service day, when they were committing themselves to service to our country, praying, that was the backdrop. The
Thank you.
message it sends to Muslims is very dangerous, and we have to be careful. Judge the action. The susceptibility will be there. We have to deal with the susceptibility, not with the language they use.
Thank you, Dr. Zogby.